Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Research Comms podcast, brought to you this week from the heart of Bloomsbury in London. Bloomsbury is one of the city's most attractive and vibrant areas, also in some ways its literary and intellectual capital. Also home to one of its most iconic buildings, Senate House, which is a very striking Art Deco building. Vast, austere, slightly menacing, with a very rich history. In the Second World War, it was taken over and used as the Ministry of Information. Also acted as inspiration for George Orwell's Ministry of Truth in 1984. And there's a rumour that Hitler was so impressed by it that he wished to use it as his headquarters in the event of an occupation of Great Britain. And so he ordered that it should be saved from bombing. I don't know how true that is, but certainly it's a rumour I've heard. Anyway, it's also home to the School of Advanced Study, which is part of the University of London, and the headquarters for the Being Human Festival, which is the UK's only festival totally dedicated to celebrating research in the humanities, organised by one Michael Eades, who is my next guest, today's guest on the podcast. We're going to be talking all about public engagement with the humanities, challenges and excitements of putting on a large-scale festival such as Being Human. So there'll be some chat about the humanities, but even if you're not directly involved in humanities research, if you're more involved in the science communication world, there's still going to be plenty for you to enjoy. There are many universal concepts about engaging the public with research that apply across the board, and it's always nice to foster greater collaboration between the different sectors. So I hope you stick around, and I hope everybody else enjoys what's to come. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
I thought we should probably start off. I'll officially introduce you by your official title. I believe it's still official title. Is it Michael Eades, Public Engagement Manager and Cultural Context Fellow at the School of Advanced Study? Is that right?
That's it, yeah, spot on. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful.
So, if you maybe just start talking about what that role entails. What do you do here?
Yeah, sure. So basically it's a dual role that incorporates management and a bit of research, but I'm the Public Engagement Manager, so that involves overseeing a number of projects, including the Being Human Festival, which is by far the largest public engagement project that we do here. But also we do kind of training, we do various events through the year, and we've got a public engagement team here that I oversee. And then I'm also doing some research, so research into kind of public engagement.
Cool, sounds very varied. And so a lot of your time, I understand, is spent on organising the Being Human Festival. Tell me a bit about its story, how it came to be, a bit more about what's involved.
Yeah, sure, yeah. As you said, I mean, our tagline really is we're the UK's only national festival of the humanities. We set it up in 2014, so we run it from here at the School of Advanced Study in partnership with the AHRC, which is the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and the British Academy. And it's really a festival which is all about public engagement with humanities research, which for us means doing something slightly different to your kind of standard literary or cultural or arts festival, and really doing something that focuses more on creating meaningful exchanges between researchers and the public, or researchers and kind of non-specialists, I guess, is the key thing. And as I say, it's really about kind of research as well, which is something that's slightly different to a lot of the other things which are out there in the festival landscape. So it's about taking kind of high-level stuff that happens in universities and other places of knowledge. So we have archives and libraries as well taking part in the festival, and museums. And connecting that research to kind of everyday life, I suppose, and everyday people. So, in terms of scale, last year we had about 350 events across the country, or events and activities in, I think, about 51 towns and cities.
Goodness.
Yeah, and they're mostly organised by universities, as I say, but with museums and other partners.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a wonderful event. And it's been going for how long now?
We're just going to the 5th year, so we started it in 2014.
Excellent. And give a flavour of some of the sort of events that have happened in the past years that sort of give people an idea of what the festival's all about, because it's very eclectic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really, really eclectic. Yeah, so it can be anything from really kind of small scale, but really nice kind of substantial stuff, like just kind of traditional things like walking tours and object handling sessions and workshops and things like that, right up to kind of more ambitious performance style, really innovative things. So just to give you a couple of examples off the top of my head, we had a really cool event a couple of years ago in Sheffield called Intoxicants at the Sheffield Tap, which was a group of researchers who were looking at the history of intoxication across various different... yeah.
And it was in a pub, does it sound like?
It was in a pub, yeah. So the Sheffield Tap is a pub in Sheffield railway station. And what they did is they got a bunch of people together and had a kind of an evening in the pub looking at things like the history of drinking culture, drinking songs, pub culture, that sort of stuff. And they had a kind of sing-along as great. Well. And I think they had a few pints as well. Yeah.
Nice.
So that was a really, really good one. We also had an event up in Dundee a couple of years ago, which was it was an event looking at H.G. Wells and his kind of history in Dundee, and they staged a Martian autopsy. Martian autopsy. What a good idea. So it's kind of a performance lecture, I guess, but they had a pathologist there, so it was Dame Sue Black, who's a leading forensic scientist, conducting an autopsy on an alien that was made by the kind of design school at Dundee. Great. And just using that as a way of exploring H.G. Wells's writing, because they had an English scholar there as well, and connecting that to kind of science and medicine, and that was just a really cool kind of
that
fun
sounds
event.
Brilliant. And I think that's interesting that you mentioned that sort of the combination of humanities with science, because it feels like this festival has come about at a time. It's a sort of very timely arrival for the festival, of time to celebrate research into the humanities, because I don't know if you agree or not, but it does feel as if, not just in the UK, but I think in the States as well, there's sort of ever increasing focus on STEM subjects, as the kind of practical, useful sort of subjects to study and to research, and perhaps with the sort of pushing aside of the humanities to some extent. I know that a couple of years ago, I remember the education secretary at the time was sort of actively encouraging students to take up STEM subjects instead of humanities, because she said that that humanities, if you choose those subjects, it's going to hold you back for the rest of your life. Which, I mean, how do you feel when you hear people sort of saying things like that?
I mean, statements like that are just really annoying, obviously, and kind of misleading. I think it's very interesting, really, all of this stuff around the kind of crisis of the humanities, if you like, is there's a certain extent to which people have been saying that about the humanities ever since the humanities became a thing.
Right.
I mean, the facts are really that more people are studying humanities subjects than ever, and the humanities, to a certain extent, subsidise the sciences in universities anyway.
Right.
In terms of student numbers and fees and that kind of side of things. From what I've seen of the humanities landscape in the UK, and in the UK specifically, I think it is different in the States, is that they're actually in quite a kind of healthy state at the moment. I think what we do see is something of a kind of rhetorical devaluing of the humanities, which is a problem, I think, and that does need to be challenged when it comes up. It's not really what the Being Human Festival is about, though. Right. I mean, we don't really see Being Human as being so much about kind of advocating for the humanities. It's more just about demonstrating, I suppose, just how varied and rich the humanities are, and the kind of research that happens in the humanities is. I mean, I've worked really in the humanities in various different ways for years myself, and until I started doing the festival, I really had like no idea of all of these different types of research and these kind of really cool research projects that are happening. So I mean, if I don't know about it, it's unlikely that a non-specialist kind of just average person in the street is going to know much about it either.
Yeah, sure.
So it is really kind of about raising the visibility of it, I guess, and finding ways to connect it to people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not a science, it's not a humanities versus STEM thing. It's really not. And a lot of our participants and organisers are working really closely with STEM researchers.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, the other thing to say really is that when you speak to scientists and people working in STEM, they're not dismissive of humanities research. So it's sometimes quite hard to kind of put your finger on who exactly is kind of generating this kind of narrative, because it's not the STEM researchers. It doesn't typically seem to be the public.
No.
So it's kind of like, what's driving this?
What then do you hope that members of the public who come to the events and activities of the festival are going to come away in terms of their understanding of the humanities and their engagement with the research? What do you hope that they'll come away feeling or having benefited from?
Well, it's a two-way thing, really. So it's partly about the researchers themselves benefiting from interacting with the public.
Yeah.
But I guess really what we want people to come away with is a better understanding and appreciation of how the humanities have a bearing on kind of everyday life. It's just a sort of refresher, really, of why these things that sometimes seem a bit kind of high-flown and distant and not particularly relevant, just how they connect, because obviously a lot of people go to museums and galleries and things like that in a relatively everyday kind of a way, but they're not necessarily drawing back the sort of dotted line to the research that underpins all of that stuff, because most of that content in one way or another has had the involvement of a humanities researcher in producing the content. But yeah, I mean, even in anything really, the humanities are there, even just in conversation and the way that political problems and things are framed conceptually, that's where the humanities come in as well. I mean, one of the things that's been really interesting over the past few years that we've been doing this festival is that the sorts of things that I was studying when I was at university doing a PhD in critical theory, which you don't typically think of as being the most worldly subject, they've come kind of roaring into the mainstream. So stuff like the kind of Rhodes Must Fall debate around kind of statues in Oxford and then in the south of the USA. Post-colonialism, these kind of debates around race have come very much, kind of really into the kind of the public eye. Yeah. And this is really the realm of humanities research. It's kind of history, race and gender studies, the Me Too thing as well. So these kind of debates are happening in kind of, in mainstream discourse, so, mainstream media. They're not kind of remote and ethereal. So to kind of say that they're in some way separate from all of that is just really, really wrong. Yeah, no, I think, and not to focus too much again on that kind of the false conflict between science and the humanities, but one of the arguments you sometimes hear is sort of the sciences are, if you want to solve the kind of big challenges of today, climate change and disease and so on, it's the sciences that you should be looking to. But as you say, some of the most important issues that we are facing are actually very much tied in with humanities research and the study of humanities. So absolutely, yeah. And I mean, even those kind of big medical challenges, the humanities are typically really right there in all of those things in terms of medical ethics. I mean, the kind of issues around aging populations and things like that, social care. There's the huge kind of humanities connections and involvement in all of those things. And I think actually politically it's very dangerous to try and separate out science and technology and engineering and those kind of things from the humanities, because this is what has happened in a lot of dictatorships actually, historically speaking. It's like, this is where they try and kind of say, well, we're only going to do pure science, pure tech and pure engineering, and then not study history, not study philosophy, ethics, and all of those kinds of things. And I mean, it doesn't really work to do that, because you get a very unbalanced view on all of those things. And B, as I say, I think it's quite dangerous to try and enforce that separation.
So when you're looking at your audience, again, I know that in the public engagement sector, there is a lot of focus at the moment on reaching underserved audiences. It always sounds like undeserved, but underserved audiences. How do you go about sort of broadening your reach of the festival so that it's not just the usual kind of festival museum goers that turn up?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's something that's a continuous kind of work in progress, I think, for us and for the humanities sector, and for any kind of HE project generally. Because I think by their very nature, obviously, universities have always been a bit selective and a bit elitist. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's an important thing that we want to work on more. It's one of the kind of priorities for the festival moving forwards, actually, is that we do more work with towns and cities where they maybe don't have a university, or where there's a particularly kind of sharp town and gown divide.
Yeah.
So that's quite a big thing for us. We try to do that mainly it's partly by the kind of institutional culture, I guess, that we're trying to embed through the festival and how we work with our organisers around the country. So it's partly about kind of training them up and sharing best practice. It's partly about how we kind of shape our call for participation, and particularly in terms of the funding that we give out, trying to make sure that we support the right types of project. So we're really keen on encouraging people to work in a kind of smart way with community partners, which can mean anything from, let's say, a kind of local museum, or, you know, a kind of an arts collective or a community group or something like that.
So it's harnessing the resources that are already in place to...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the resources and the relationships, really. I mean, an example of a project that worked really well on that front for us last year from the festival, if it's okay to give an example.
Yeah, of course.
Was a project that we had in Blackburn, and it was a project that was done in collaboration with Blackburn Museum, who have this amazing collection of... It's a book collection by a kind of Blackburn philanthropist from the 19th century. And that was a researcher actually who's based in London at this institution, at the University of London, but who'd had a kind of long-standing research relationship with Blackburn Museum. And it's just a good example of kind of mutual benefit, because it was research expertise illuminating the resource that they have there, which is this amazing book collection, which is of kind of international importance, but which is slightly kind of underused, really, in its kind of current setting. But the project that they did for us for the Being Human Festival was a kind of theatre piece that was written specifically about that collection and about the collector who'd put it together.
Oh, great.
And they did something with Blackburn Museum, so they did something in the museum, but then they did something that took it outside the museum as well, and they did something in the old cotton exchange in Blackburn.
Great.
And the kind of the local connections in Blackburn helped them get the audience for that, because, you know, you need that kind of local knowledge and the relationships to kind of give that a kind of critical mass and get it off the ground. And yet the researchers from London and from the University of London really brought some kind of something unique to that kind of project as well. And it just kind of came together and it worked really, really nicely. So that's just one example of kind of really good partnership.
Those examples sound great. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, and so it'll be interesting perhaps to use that as an example, as a kind of case study, is how you go about evaluating what impact these kind of events have had on either local people or whoever's turned up and engaged with the researchers. I feel sort of sometimes, again, perhaps some more kind of science communication and public engagement events might be easier to sort of evaluate impact. But do you think it's harder maybe with the humanities to gauge the impact that a piece of public engagement has had on people in terms of changing their understanding of?
I don't know if it is really, to be honest with you. I think that's a bit of a myth that I think sometimes humanities researchers talk themselves into, in the sense of like, well, what we do can't be quantified,
right?
Can't be measured.
Yeah.
You know?
So how do you go about measuring this?
I mean, I think really one of the things that's been interesting for me in terms of starting to work in public engagement is that a lot of that work has actually been done already in very sophisticated ways, both in the arts and in kind of STEM-based public engagement, or in public engagement generally. So, I mean, we work with an external evaluator who kind of does the festival evaluation for Being Human, and with organisers as well, to develop some kind of basic surveys that we do at the events. So we've got a kind of paper survey and an online survey that people can fill in. We do some kind of observation of events as well, which I think is quite interesting. So we have kind of secret shoppery style observation.
What, eavesdropping on conversations and
that sounds a bit sinister.
Ministry of Information. Yeah.
Just going and watching the event, you know, as a kind of impartial-ish observer, and speaking to the people in the audience. So doing some kind of vox pop style things, because I think that's a useful way of drawing out some of the more nuanced stuff around understanding. And particularly for us, one question that we've been kind of probing is, has this activity changed how you think about the humanities?
Oh, right, okay.
That's quite a tricky one actually to quantify, and that I think that can only really come out of discourse and conversation with people. But we also spend quite a lot of time talking to our organisers as well, because that's a very important side of things for us. As I say, it is always two-way. So it's about developing academics and researchers in their kind of skills and understanding of public engagement, and kind of assessing what they've taken from it as well as audiences. Yeah.
That brings me on to another area I wanted to discuss, which is one of the challenges of public engagement that I come across quite often across all kind of different spheres of public engagement, is that you have certain researchers who are really interested in taking part, maybe increasing their public engagement activity, but sometimes they come up against a certain amount of resilience from, it could be, superiors within their department or at a more institutional level, of people who see public engagement perhaps as a sort of distraction from the serious business of their actual research. Is that an attitude that you're familiar with? Maybe not through the festival itself, because I suppose people come to you with ideas, but
to a certain extent, yes. I think one of the things that has been changing in recent years, and that needs to change probably more, is that public engagement has historically, I think, been seen as a kind of noble but nice to have thing, which is done kind of as an extramural free time kind of an activity, which everyone kind of says is very nice but hasn't been kind of rewarded.
Yeah.
And I think we have seen a slight change, possibly post-ref and with the focus on impact and that kind of thing, in terms of academics actually using public engagement as part of their promotion they're actually rewarded for it, but that does need to change more. I think at the moment there's a certain amount of mixed messaging going on in terms of public engagement being articulated as something that's valued, but not being properly, or as much as it should be, kind of embedded into promotion criteria and that kind of thing. Yeah,
and I mean, I suppose that's obviously very helpful in terms of encouraging people to get involved who might otherwise not have, but they might still then be doing it for the purposes of promotion or sort of ticking a box for a grant application or something. But there are far more sort of fundamental benefits, aren't there, to actually, in terms of public engagement with research, for the researchers themselves, that it can kind of influence their own research and change the way they think about what they're doing.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's like doing the Being Human Festival the past few years. I've seen that. I mean, articulated really clearly by researchers themselves. You know, so often new connections, new perspectives on research, communication skills. All of these kind of things are incredibly rewarding, and just the kind of the buzz that comes out of it as well, and the kind of the sense of, I mean, a really common comment that we get through the sort of festival evaluation process is, this has reminded me about why I got into HE in the first place. You know, taking knowledge out to really diverse and sort of new audiences. That's kind of what it's all about, really, at the end of the day. But I would say that typically I haven't had to spend a lot of my time in this job kind of persuading people to do public engagement, or persuading them that it's kind of part of the package, of being an academic. I think that's something, particularly in the humanities, maybe that's kind of understood actually as being, this is kind of part of what we signed up to, right, when we entered this profession. Yeah. And I mean, if you look at most university charters as well, it's there. It's like we should be doing kind of, it's often couched in very kind of like Victorian language. Like we should be educating beyond the university and playing a kind of noble civic role. Right. So the Victorian language is problematic, but the kind of the mission and the aspiration isn't really. Yeah. It's all good stuff. But yes, it's not been kind of a process of kind of persuading people that it's something that they should be doing. It's more about persuading them about the benefits of dedicating time to this when they're also under incredible pressure to be producing research and teaching and all of the rest of it, and those pressures are considerable and shouldn't be underestimated.
No, and that's where practical assistance from the institutions comes into play, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's the infrastructure as well is incredibly important to sustain, and that also at the moment is fairly patchy across the UK in public engagement.
More work to be done. Theme of this podcast generally, because it's mostly what I'm involved with, is digital means of boosting public engagement and research communication. Obviously, the Being Human Festival is very much about live events and activities and people turning up in person to sort of engage with researchers. But to what extent do you employ digital tools, either from the sort of marketing side of things or within the festival itself, within the events themselves? How do you see the sort of interplay between kind of live and digital, as it were?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, in lots of ways, I don't think the festival would ever have happened if we didn't have the kind of social media and digital technology that's taken off over the last kind of 10 years or so. Just because with any kind of large scale project like this, there's always the kind of question of how do you bind it all together. And obviously, I guess historically that's meant lots and lots of kind of advertising and kind of print media stuff, which we just wouldn't have been able to afford. So I think the kind of the liberation for us has been being able to use kind of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and that kind of stuff as a kind of as a way of building up the network and community of the festival, which again for me and for the team here is a really important part of what we're doing. Because what we're trying to do with Being Human is to create a kind of humanities public engagement network and community, not a kind of subject specific one, which is what has tended to develop before in the humanities. So you have these really strong kind of history, classics, literature, philosophy networks, all of whom are kind of very well connected in and of themselves, but haven't been that great at kind of connecting to other subjects in the humanities. So, I mean, really for me, I mean, Twitter particularly has been like massive, massive part of the festival.
And is that, I mean, Twitter in particular, because each social media platform obviously has different uses and people go on for different reasons. Do you find that, are you using Twitter, for example, to reach out to other academics and other researchers, and then maybe Facebook to reach the public, or how do you see a sort of difference in use of those different platforms?
It's kind of a bit of both across both, actually, to be honest with you. I think Facebook is always a bit more kind of public facing in some ways, and Facebook for us is very useful in terms of getting people to events and things like that. Twitter has been useful more for building up the kind of academic community or the kind of the festival community, I guess, and for kind of having conversations with people in very remote places and that kind of side of things. But we also use Facebook for organisers as well, so we have a kind of organisers Facebook group and that kind of thing. So a bit of both actually. For both.
Keep it flexible. What is it about festivals that you feel makes them such a good space for people to explore kind of new ideas and to engage with new ideas?
It's an interesting question, this, because there are many different types of festivals. So the festival can mean anything from
debauched.
It can mean anything from kind of Glastonbury right through to a kind of very, very kind of place specific, site specific thing, or something much larger and more diffuse like Being Human. So I don't know, I mean, I was thinking about this. I mean, I think there's something special about having a kind of, I mean, I think festivals by definition are usually a kind of carnivalesque kind of time outside time, so you have a specific time that it happens, and it's a kind of a time in which something special is happening and sort of normal rules are kind of suspended and that kind of thing. So I think that's quite interesting, and I think there's something about, with our festival anyway, there's something about all of these kind of interesting projects are all happening at one time. And there's a slightly kind of like breathless kind of thing of like, well, like how much of this can I get to? How much can I experience? It's like a controlled explosion, I think, really, of like, this is all going to come at you all in one go, and it's like, grab what you can. Obviously, there are opportunities to get more afterwards as well. But I think that is quite special, and I think that's what for me, that's what a kind of a festival is, really, even if it's a small one. Normal life is slightly kind of interrupted, I guess, or suspended for a little bit,
which changes people's mentality to, I guess, makes them a bit more open-minded, perhaps, or sort of open to new ideas, and perhaps cast off some of the prejudices. I don't know, it might be too sort of too much to expect.
Maybe, I think it's just that. I think it is that thing of interruption, really. It's like, as you're sort of going about your kind of day-to-day life, it's very much, you're always kind of, whatever you do, really, you're sort of in a routine, and you're worrying about things that you just have to kind of deal with. So it's like, my bus didn't turn up, or I need to go get the shopping in, or like whatever. And I think you do have these kind of moments where things are kind of interrupted and sort of thrown up into the air a bit more. But that's why it's really important that festivals generally intrude upon the kind of realm of the everyday, I think, because I think if the interruption is only happening within like a field in Glastonbury or a field in Hay-on-Wye that you have to pay to get into, then that is a limit. That is of limited kind of impact and kind of resonance within the everyday world. So that's kind of that's why I think it's really important for Being Human and for other stuff, actually, to sort of go
taking
outside
it to the different communities from all the islands through sort of as far and wide as possible.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. So I think like the more you can kind of stumble across a kind of festival, or the more a festival can kind of be taken to you know. I mean, another project that I've done is this thing called Festival in a Box, where we're actually taking festivals into people's homes. But yeah, that's another story.
People can look that up as well. Just want to talk as well about some of the practicalities of putting on a festival like this. I mean, for people who are listening, who are wanting to or involved in putting on their own public engagement events, maybe not to this scale, but whatever size. I mean, now you've been doing it for a few years, I guess you're sort of like a seasoned pro, and I'm sure it's all a breeze, but are there any particular challenges that you have encountered? Is there anything that you do differently now to how you did it 4 years ago, sort of lessons you've learned that you can impart to people so they don't make the same mistakes?
Are we talking about running festivals or doing public engagement activities generally?
Let's keep it general, but I guess some of those will probably be festival related, right? But public engagement generally.
I mean, I think in general terms, the really important lessons that I've learned in public engagement are around thinking about really carefully about who your audience is and how you're going to get to them, basically. So, I mean, the really important thing that I've learned is to think about not think about how you're going to interest people in your research, but to think about how you're going to connect your research to something that they're already interested in and passionate about, and something that people would do anyway with their leisure time. I mean, they're always the most successful events, and they're always the ones that you don't have to push very hard in terms of promotion, because it's something that people just want to do. So in terms of festival organising, I think the reason why Being Human Festival has taken off in the way that it has is that it was genuinely a gap in the landscape. And I think, you know, there was no kind of joined up platform for humanities public engagement before, really, in that kind of sense, certainly in a kind of festival context. So I think that's important. I think because there are a lot of festivals out there, and that's good, but I think if you're planning to start a new project of any sort, really, is there a kind of an appetite for it, and is there a genuine kind of gap? Is there are you putting in place a piece of infrastructure that doesn't already exist? So yeah, I think that's an important kind of first question to ask yourself always.
Yeah, motivations. I guess it's easy to get swept up in the excitement of putting something on because you're doing it, but never without questioning actually whether there's a need for it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, I mean, that goes back to just organising a one-off event as well. Actually, it's like, I mean, really, is there a kind of appetite for this? And I
suppose you know when you put it on, and if nobody turns up, you realise.
Well, exactly, yeah. I think one thing that we've been trying to encourage organisers to do is to just talk to their intended audience about their idea and see whether they think it's something that would be of interest. It's a kind of a basic thing. It's something that people often don't do.
Always ask questions.
And it's that kind of, if we build it, they will come mentality. And it's like, well, often they don't actually.
And it's a waste of your time and
exactly.
Precious research time.
Indeed, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. Would love to hear then about what you've got planned for this year's festival. We've heard a lot about the past ones and about sort of the festival in general. So what stage are you at? We've got a few months left, don't you? It's November, right?
Yes, November the 15th to 24th this year. So we're back. That's good. We've got a new theme this year, which is origins and endings.
Nice.
Thank you. Yeah. So,
Was that your work? Do you always come up with them? Or
it's a group kind of creative effort. But we've been doing the kind of dichotomies over the past few years. So we had Hope and Fear in 2016, which was very topical, and Lost and Found last year, which was really, really good fun. But yes, origins and endings this year, which I'm really excited about because I think it taps into really the fundamentals of being human. So it's kind of like everyone is born, everyone is going to die at some point, and then there may or may not be something afterwards, who knows. But also about, thinking about the kind of origins and endings of humanity itself, and the origins of art, the origins of language, the endings of language, so kind of lost languages, things like that, post-humanism, cyborgs, artificial life, all of those kind of things.
Goodness, amazing.
Yeah.
And so people have... I've been sort of seeing on Twitter recently, again, the digital platforms, calls for applications for funding and for people to sort of submit ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the call for applications has gone out a couple of weeks ago. Deadline April the 13th for funding applications, and later in June for events that don't need direct funding from us. So yes, like everyone, please have a look at those and send us in ideas.
That theme sounds absolutely amazing. God, all the sort of areas that you mentioned of possible exploration sound wonderful. So I'm sure there'll be plenty to explore.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you.
And I look forward to this year's festival. So that was my interview with Michael Eades. Very interesting guy, doing a very interesting job. I certainly learnt a lot from it, and I hope you did too. So thanks again to Michael for taking the time to speak with me. I'd just like to give a little teaser of the next episode before I go. And my guest for that, I'm very excited to announce. I'm always excited to announce my guests, but in particular this time, a highly esteemed scientist, researcher, medic, neurologist, all-round great man, Professor Sir Doug Turnbull. Professor Turnbull is the head of the Wellcome Trust Centre for Mitochondrial Research at Newcastle University, and last year was knighted for the outstanding work that he has done over the years for people with mitochondrial disease and their families, and the research that he's done into it. Really pioneering work. And I will be speaking with Doug about the public engagement work that he does, which is phenomenal for the community of people with mitochondrial disease across the UK, and the incredible effort that he and his team and members of the mitochondrial disease community have gone through in order to achieve a change in legislation that has allowed for pioneering fertility treatments. You've probably heard about it. It's in the newspapers often touted as the creation of 3-parent babies. I have a feeling that Professor Turnbull and his team aren't wildly fond of that terminology, but that's one of the things we'll be discussing. Communication of ideas, how to work with the press in order to tell your story in a clear and compelling way, and in a way that generates the kind of interest that you might need to affect change. It's going to be fascinating. I hope you can join us. Thanks for listening. See you soon.